The truths of postmodernism are very much reflected in the current state of the news. This has a lot to do with the recent rise in social media as an avenue for news to be read and disseminated. Postmodernism depends upon the notion that truth is relative. People recognize that their beliefs are based upon certain things, like their own personal history, their nationality, ethnicity, and family background. Now, more than ever, people are willing to admit that their beliefs and their worldviews are based primarily upon their own personal experiences and their own unique relationships with the world. Keeping personal biases out of the news is becoming more and more difficult because of the nature of social media. As Douglas Rushkoff asserts in Media Virus, the data sphere, or media space, is the new territory for human interaction, economic expansion, and especially social and political machination. There is no escaping the media space. In Media Virus, he says, the distinction between tabloid, network, and even satirical reportage has disappeared. This is because the data sphere has allowed information to be conveyed in a more subjective manner than ever before. One of the newest media outlets that politicians utilize is social media like Facebook and Twitter, which have given candidates agency to be their own reporters. An example of this new campaigning strategy can be found in Terry McAuliffe's fall 2013 campaign for the governor of Virginia. He employed both Facebook and Twitter in order to win over the public. His Facebook profile even includes a holiday card-style photograph of his entire family that says, "Wishing everyone a happy holiday season from the McAuliffes." The public and private spheres of a politician's life have become so blurred by the media space that a politician can wish the public a happy holidays in a way that feels personal and accessible. It is accessible because anyone who has a computer can access it. There is no longer a need to go out and buy a newspaper to hear from the politicians. You can now directly access their campaigns without even leaving home. The data sphere has allowed information to be conveyed in a more subjective manner than ever before. Terry McAuliffe did not have to simply rely on reporters to move his campaign along. He could do it himself through social media. Rushkoff says that previous campaigns have brought the tabloid press onto the same level as more formal journalism. But this can now be taken a step further by saying that often Twitter users, such as Terry McAuliffe, are given just as much credibility as formal journalists, never mind that the politicians and their campaign staffs are the one posting and reporting on themselves. The data sphere has allowed politicians to bypass the middleman. They no longer need to depend on others to report upon their campaigns. There are now platforms for them to do it themselves. Rushkoff accurately calls this participatory media and an interactive style media. Let us now return to the concept of postmodernism. It is reasonable to say that the more power social media, like Facebook and Twitter, has over the news, the more postmodern it becomes. The more news is dependent on social media, the more biased it becomes, as in the case of the politicians quote-unquote reporting on themselves. And the more biased it becomes, the more it is based on the personal experiences of the quote-unquote reporters. The thing is that personal experiences are subjective. They are unique to one individual and to no one else, so then they are relative, which, as previously mentioned, is one of the foundational notions of postmodernism, that truth is relative. In Media Virus, Rushkoff argues that we live in an age where the value of data, images, and ideologies has surpassed that of material acquisitions and physical territory. The physical territory to which Rushkoff is referring is far less subjective than the new frontier of the media space. An example of this can be seen in the difference between newspapers and blogs. Blogs are steadily becoming seen as a more legitimate place for the public to obtain information. The problem with this is that bloggers do not have anyone checking their information before it is accessible to the public. Articles in a physical newspaper are read by more than one set of eyes before they are published. They have to be approved by a copy editor and an editor before they can be read by the broader public. The fact that anyone can write quote-unquote news in the form of a blog is great in the way that it allows everyone to have an opportunity to have their voice heard, but it is also equally scary because it means that writers are not being held to the same standards of accuracy and impartiality.
The next big dramatic thing came after 9/11, and that's when blogs hit. Because Lucy Ann and Drudge were just news aggregators, and the only thing bloggy about them were the commenters. And quite often they had a huge community, and they were fun to read. But then blogs hit, and you had people like Glenn Reynolds of Instapundit, Powerline, which helped expose the whole Dan Rather thing, and all of a sudden these things took off. And the one thing they had that newspapers didn't have was personality. the old institutional, boring, pyramid form of news writing that purported to be objective. People were tired of it, and all of a sudden they had this whole new world of people who express things in energetic and interesting ways, and they didn't feel like they had to use that old news jargon that that they were tired of. And all of a sudden they started saying, well, boy, this is I can get a lot of information in an hour of reading blogs.
In Critical Dialogues in Cultural Studies, Stuart Hall says the thing that is distinctive about a cultural studies perspective is in the question of politics of culture or the culture of politics, and that there are other elements as well, such as breaking across the traditional ones, for example, the attention of all of those voices, positions, political formation, etc. Here the words of Hall demonstrate how more voices are being heard. Much of this is the truth today because of the influence of social media and the internet and how it allows anyone with an internet connection to be heard and consequently hear others. Social media has created a shift in the way people find their news. In the past, an individual would turn to a newspaper as their source of news. Then over time, people began turning to specific television stations for information. More recently, people have begun reading news articles online through the websites of specific publications. For example, instead of picking up a physical copy of the New York Times, people instead read articles off their website. But even this is experiencing a change. A vast amount of readers now rely on their social media streams as their source of news. What this means is that people no longer go directly to a news website to stay updated on what is happening in the world. They instead turn to their Facebook or Twitter feeds and read only the articles that their friends, family, or the people they are following post. This means that what an individual is reading is dependent upon their social network circles. For example, it is not uncommon for the only news a 21-year-old reads is to be the articles that show up on his or her Facebook. The problem with this is that it is very limiting. It means the only news that they are reading is the news that has been posted by their small circle of friends. So then, even the way that people find their news is becoming more and more reliant on personal bias because people are picking and choosing what to read based upon who amongst their social media circles was the one to post it. The articles that people read the most are the ones being posted onto the social media sites by their friends and family. This likely means that people are getting their news from individuals with worldviews which are very similar to their own. This has led to a shift in the way that news is even produced. There are now whole departments of agencies that publish news which are solely dedicated to social media. Newspapers now have social media managers, people whose entire job it is to handle the news organization's Facebook and Twitter. This pressure for news organizations to publish online has created a number of new issues. One of these is that there is more of a rush for pieces to be completed so that they can be put on the internet for readers as quickly as possible. This demands that journalists complete articles as quickly as possible, which gives them less time for fact-checking and research. This is where postmodernism's notions of personal bias and relative truth come up again. Since journalists are encouraged to finish stories as quickly as they can, they must rely more and more on their own biases to fill in the gaps where research leaves off. Most journalists are not actually experts in every topic they cover within their articles. This is why research is so important to the field of journalism. But with more and more pressure to quickly post articles to social media sites, instead of waiting to publish an article until the next print issue comes out, reporting techniques are shifting to allow more and more room for personal bias. A decade ago, it was very difficult to find and connect with people that you had once known in high school or college, even with the power of the web. When you moved away, most people lost touch permanently. The social media sites such as Facebook, Instagram, and Google+ are making it easier for people to find one another and reconnect, even after decades of being apart. Despite the fact that these sites are a great way to see what is happening in the lives of friends and family, we can see that many of these social networking sites tend to have a hidden agenda and ideas that can directly affect the lives of the users. It seems that nowadays social media has ulterior motives to creating social connections. With so many viewers searching for and maintaining connections, social media sites are ripe for marketing endeavors, and over the past few years, users have seen a rise in the amount of advertising on such social media sites. In the eyes of marketing executives, it is fair to assume social media users are appreciated for little more than the products they buy. Rushkoff claims the American media machine has been fostered by those hoping to market products and develop a consumer mindset. From this consumer mindset, Social media users tend to appreciate advertisements customized to his or her very tastes, but where is far enough? Most users of social media sites tolerate exploitation of their social circles for a profit margin. So long as companies are not too overt about ads and promotions, most users do not mind it. In most cases, users would have to subscribe to the content in the first place. Graduate student at American University Whitney Boggs points out such an instance in her research of social media's impact on marketing. She says that in 2009, photography and imaging giant Kodak Corporation teamed up with Yahoo and Espanol to launch a new and innovative marketing campaign targeted towards their Hispanic consumers. Encouraging their Hispanic consumers to share photos online that display their heritage, Kodak created an online mosaic of the images, and for each one uploaded, a $2 donation was contributed to the Hispanic College Fund. By encouraging Hispanic consumers, the campaign was primarily promoted through KodakGallery.com, as well as Twitter and Facebook social networking sites. This subscription, although with seemingly good intentions, acts as an acceptance of corporate behavior and suggests that users are willing to overlook and ignore the agendas set into motion by these large marketing campaigns. Kodak, looking to increase its rapport with customers, created this campaign to promote itself with more than just Hispanic Heritage Month. And this is just one way that companies target audiences to increase their consumer clientele. Youths, growing up in this hyper-marketing environment, are a demographic that we should worry about. They may have the technological know-how older generations do not, but this does not make up for the fact that with age comes naivety. David Rushkoff notes that although youngsters know how to use technology, they are ignorant of just how technology is using them. He says, social media sites were made by companies whose interests go far beyond helping kids express themselves and make friends. Our kids are not the customers here. They are both the product and the unwitting labor. The interests he is discussing here are quite obviously monetary profit. These sites, although seemingly designed for the user, actually contain transactions going on behind the scenes, contracts with other corporations, endorsements, publicity, etc. Rushkoff adds that the more harmless or inane the forum, the more unsuspecting the audience. Meaning, young audiences, which make up a majority of social networking users, are falling prey to such a ploy. The large companies who run these sites have more in mind than making just a few new friends, but use that as a basis for operating, and we see these sites make billions of dollars in a matter of few years. The younger generations don't see that, however, and frankly, it appears they don't care, because apps like Spotify, Pandora, and YouTube are chock full of advertisements, yet they are still downloaded daily and are incredibly popular. Users simply see social media as places to gossip, converse, and be entertained, and therefore consider ads as arbitrary to themselves, when in fact this is far from reality. Ads push for consumption and consumerism, which is not what our young generation needs to focus on. Therefore, social media is certainly having a rather large impact on our daily lives, both good and bad. Those who spend too much time on social sites are inundated with marketing campaigns that they may not realize have an influence on them, such as product marketing, television campaigns, and other advertisements such as these. And those who don't use social networking devices may be unable to rekindle old fires. In our technologically advanced day and age, we may be making connections and staying in touch, but we are also creating a society that is obliviously being sucked into a consumer-driven market.
There really is a gap in perception and understanding between generations about the value of engagement with online activities. And so in the adult world, there was a general perception that when kids are in front of the screen or messing around with their computer, that it's a waste of time, that it's taking away from more productive activities, healthier activities, whereas kids ascribe much more value to those activities. And that's, in a way, not so different from, an earlier generation trying to get your teenage daughter off the phone or trying to get your son to come in from playing with their friends to focus on their homework. But I think there's a more general perception in the culture around new media that is associated with entertainment media and other forms of just mediated activity, that it is inherently a space that is hostile to learning. And that's the perception that I think we really need to work against. And part of it is understanding the differences between different kinds of online activities. So friendship-driven activity is very different from interest-driven activity. And if you lump them all together, you're actually missing the opportunity for learning that's in the space, and also not recognizing the sort of baseline social learning that's happening in the friendship space.
The landscape of education is drastically altered by social media. Education organizations recognize the phenomena and have thusly moved to produce a more digitally literate student. The International Society for Technology and Education, or ISTE, is one such organization which has produced a framework of standards for instructors to adopt and apply. Rushkoff writes, "Children raised hearing and speaking a language always understand it better than adults who attempt to learn its rules. This is why educators believe our kids understand computers and their programming languages better than the people who designed them." The analogy and analysis is apt, even today, and such a reality demands that educators responsibly impart the essential skills required in a computer-centric society.
For the volume of a sphere.
4/3 pi times the radius cubed. 1.26 any limits.
What is the square root? 396,324. What is the dimensionality?
Dimensionality equals the logarithm of n divided by non-excludability and non-rivalry. 4/3 pi times
When is
the
an
radius.
action
When
sentence?
it is morally praiseworthy but not morally abusive.
In the spirit of adhering to digital literacy, there are two significant movements in classrooms across the country. One is called mobile learning, where instructors embrace the fact that students increasingly own smartphones, and these devices are, with greater effect, being used to communicate class lessons, assignments, and other activities that are content related. It is an incredible shift in dynamic, and the change shows a stark difference to the consideration of telephones merely a half a decade ago, where, to the frustration of many students, faculty and staff laid bans on the social technology. The second significant movement in the classroom actually takes place outside of it. This method is called flipping the classroom or flipped learning. This method gains increasing traction and involves the relocation of basic lesson content onto websites. Lower-level content is viewed and reviewed at home through online videos that are sometimes recorded by the instructor or through games produced by educators. Lower-level content, such as basics of any one concept, this translates to 1 or more hour of study and play and is done at home. Then come time for class, instructors facilitate higher order functions of analysis, evaluation, application, and creation. This model of teaching, as opposed to our more traditional schoolhouse rock, seems to better parallel the general workforce, where the labor of an employee is done at work and the study to become a better employee takes place at home, or in a comfortable setting for the learner. Of course, one might say language arts instruction has been ahead of the curve the whole time by requiring the reading of texts as homework, but readings of texts are often paired with the writings on those texts at home, which involves the evaluation, analysis, and creative part of the language arts. A speedier student may have no problem adhering to the traditional classroom homework dynamic, but it leaves room to wonder how the poor performance of a student can be improved if writing is done with the presence of an instructor as the resource. I can hear now the suggestion that teachers can use social products like Skype or FaceTime so teachers can be on call for students doing their homework. That would be yet another incredible paradigm shift. Despite any perceived benefit, is there reason to worry about the outcome of these two educational methods of mobile learning and flipped learning, both which embrace technology, both which reimagine the social space of the classroom? Should we suspect these methods of education as symptomatic of the postmodern dark side? Should we suspect these concepts as supported of Dick Hedgebeeg's vision that postmodernity is modernity without the hopes and dreams which make modernity bearable? Hedgebeeg characterizes postmodernization through the fears of automation, microtechnologies, the decline of manual labor and traditional work forms, and consumerism. However, as a contemporary reader, postmodernization appears to be quite bearable. This is perhaps due to increasing portions of our population gaining better control over our social technology. Indeed, by equipping youth to be digitally literate and aware of what power they hold over technology, our youth run less of a risk of technology being used as a tool that controls them. For us, social media seems to put our minds in the same pessimistic spiral that Hedgebig notes from his own period. We fear the digital age as Hedgebig fears postmodernity. For some of us, we alienate ourselves from the context of social media, while others of us choose to embrace social media with the intent of moving forward. In such a dynamic, there is perhaps a bizarre paradox that in our contemporary lives, to extricate ourselves from social media, we have to choose to be antisocial, and in the opposite form, if we take the reins of social media and co-opt companies as our partners, then we can take advantage of the digital landscape and act in the most possible social form. Oh!